Right now in this city, in Montreal, there are already workers who have lost their jobs because of the threat of Donald Trump's tariffs. ShearTex, a company here in Montreal, has already fired 40% of their workers. South Shore, a company that produces furniture, has fired 115 employees, all because of the threats of Donald Trump. Workers are already feeling the impact. And obviously, as a party, a New Democratic Party, that is always thinking about workers, our first thought is we have to put in place better protections for these workers. These workers should not be left on their own. They should know that there's a government there for them. And as Prime Minister, as a New Democratic leader, the party leader, and my team, we are going to make sure we do everything possible to protect these workers. One of the things we need is a better EI that better protects workers in this time of uncertainty where workers might lose their job. We need to make sure that there's protection in place for them. But beyond that, we also need to have an approach that makes us stronger, makes us more resilient. And so we need to look at a couple of changes, important changes. What we would do is change our procurement rules. We need to make sure that if we're spending public money, any public money, that it goes towards Canadian companies, Canadian contracts that hire Canadian workers, particularly unionized workers who are well paid. This is very important. If we spend our public money, it should go to Canadian workers, Canadian jobs, unionized jobs. We also have a lot of infrastructure projects. In those infrastructure projects, we need to require Canadian content. Thinking about steel and aluminum, we make it in Canada. Let us ensure that when we build, we're using Canadian content. What is also very clear is we are very vulnerable to the whims of Donald Trump. We need to have a more resilient economy, one where we sell to more countries. So we need to have better relations with Europe, with Latin America, and in this particular time with Mexico, where we share some similar challenges. But there are many other trading partners and we need to diversify. We cannot be so vulnerable to the whims of Donald Trump. But what I find really surprising right now, at a time when we are faced with serious job losses, I've talked about the job losses here in Montreal already, and the tariffs haven't even happened yet. Just the threats have already caused these job losses. At a time when people are worried about job losses, people are losing their jobs, I'm surprised that Mark Carney has also added his voice to cutting jobs. I'm not surprised that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives want to cut jobs. That's what they do. But I am surprised that Mark Carney is also thinking it's a good idea when we're facing a potential recession and we're facing serious job losses, that he wants to add to that by cutting jobs at the federal level. I think that is wrong. I want you to know that my team, these incredible candidates behind me as leader, we are going to focus on workers. At this difficult time, we need policies that protect workers, not CEOs, not billionaires, not big corporations, but we need clear plans and clear strategies and policies that put workers first. And with New Democrats, that is what we will always do. With that, I'm ready for your questions. Je suis prêt pour vos questions.
Jack, so you're talking about this is almost leader as Prime Minister. Is the campaign pledge is something you're still hopefully can push through Parliament before triggering an election?
Well, these are our pledges. These are things that we would do, but it's also things that the government could do right now. We could change our procurement rules right now so that we are spending public money on Canadian contracts or Canadian jobs and Canadian businesses, particularly those that are unionized. We can do that now. We can look at diversifying where we sell our products right now. And we absolutely need to improve our EI system right now so we can ensure that workers are not left in the cold in this difficult time.
Are you talking about limiting procurement to U.S. companies now or only the tariffs?
I think we need to do that now. We need to do that now because it's shown us that we need a stronger, resilient economy where we buy more Canadian and build more Canadian. We need to build more of the things that we need in our own country. And the way we do that are by putting in policies that incentivize and encourage the purchase of Canadian products and the building of Canadian products. And one of the ways we can do that sustainably for the long term is to have better procurement rules so that whenever we spend public money, it is going towards Canadian products. I can think of one example, Via Rail, owned by us, owned by Canada. We needed to upgrade the trains. Those trains should have been built in Canada, creating Canadian jobs for the long term and jobs that were unionized and good paying. That is a better way to spend our public money. When we procure, when we buy things at the federal level, it should go towards Canadian jobs and Canadian businesses.
So we'll go to the next question. Pierre?
Well, for the EI changes, you said you'd like to see some. What would be the specific sort of details? What's wrong with the current system in this context?
Yeah, what we saw during the pandemic was workers pay into EI, but only 40% of workers actually can access EI. So the majority of Canadians, 60% of Canadians who are working cannot access EI. That is probably the most glaring problem with the EI system. It was great at its time. It was a great idea to put in place the social safety net so that workers knew that if times got tough, if they lost their jobs, they got laid off, there would be this support in place. But it's clear it's inadequate for the modern day. So that's one major problem, the fact that there's too many workers that don't qualify for it. The amount is insufficient to meet the needs of workers, to pay the bills that we have right now with the cost of inflation. So those are two that I would highlight, the difficulty in accessing it, and two, the amount is not sufficient to cover the bills. So those are two changes that could be made and should have been made a long time ago. During the pandemic, we highlighted this glaring problem, and to date, the Liberals have still not fixed it.
And then just one follow-up in terms of procurement rules for government contracts. You mentioned you want to favorize companies that have unionized employees, but that it may be wanted in a permanent way, you know, regardless of whether there would still be tariffs or not. Is this the case that procurement rules should in general favorize companies with unionized employees going forward?
Absolutely. I want to see these procurement rules be the norm. These tariffs and these threat of tariffs have created a circumstance where we need to respond. But these changes are things that we should have always had. We should always be using our public money. If you think about it, we're spending public money on things that we need. So I mentioned the example, I think one of the best example is Via Rail. We own Via Rail, it's owned by Canadians. When we spend money on updating or buying new trains, those trains should be purchased in Canada. If we can produce those trains in Canada, we should be creating jobs in Canada. And we do have the facilities to do that. That is a better way to use our money. When we're trying to purchase things, we should look Canadian first so that we are building more in Canada. We are incentivizing companies to build important things in Canada. And to do that in a sustainable way is for companies to know that the first step will be we will prioritize Canadian companies. And then not just any companies. We want to make sure that these are contracts going to companies that have good paying jobs. And one of the best ways to ensure that those workers have safe conditions and good pay is if the workers are unionized. So absolutely, that would be a policy that I would put in place now to deal with the threat of tariffs, but moving forward, it should be a permanent policy. We need to spend our money in Canada. If it's a public money, it should go towards Canadian jobs.
Excellent. Now we'll go to questions on Zoom. We'll start with David Baxter with the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Singh. Can you hear me? Check 1, 2, 1, 2. Can you hear me?
No.
Oh, sorry. You know, it was on our end. Can you just start the question over?
Yeah. Can you hear me now, Mr. Singh?
You can, yes.
Perfect. All right. So yes, I want to go back to the EI bit there, saying too many people can't access EI. How would you expand EI then? Since that sounds like what you're talking about, you want to expand eligibility there.
Well, absolutely. We need to expand eligibility. EI should be there for all workers. If you're working in this country, you should be able to access EI. And that is not how it works right now. As I mentioned, we learned this in the pandemic, actually, that only 40% of Canadian workers can actually access EI. So we need to have a better program that covers more workers. The way we do that, we work with the experts in the field. We ensure that we have the right policy that covers workers in the right way. So there's lots of ways for us to do that. We've had discussions about that. In fact, our labor critic, Matthew Green, has a host of concrete solutions to improving EI, and I'd be happy to bring those forward for you. But what we know is that we need to expand the eligibility. More workers need to be able to access it. And the second piece, which is just as critical, is the amount that workers get has to be sufficient to pay the bills. And right now, that is not the case. So those are the two kind of glaring problems that exist with EI, and we need to fix those immediately.
Yeah, and just on the your Canadian content pitch when it comes to procurement, when you're saying you want to see more Canadian content, like going into like if it's steel, it should be Canadian steel. Are you picturing this being 100% Canadian steel, or would it be something like how it works for broadcast, where it's like 40 some odd % Canadian content is what broadcasters are mandated to put out on the airwaves?
Well, with our federal dollars, I want to see as much possible go towards Canadian. So I want to maximize that. We have certain stipulations that we have to look at, certain trade agreements, but we can absolutely encourage that with our procurement rules, with our purchasing power as a country, that we direct that towards Canadian jobs, Canadian businesses. It is clear, and it became clear in the pandemic as well. We don't produce enough of the things that we need in our own country, but we can. We have before, and we can again. How do we get there? By letting businesses know that if we spend public money, we're going to be spending it towards Canadian companies. That is a strong policy that will ensure we build more of what we need in Canada and create that predictability. That when a project comes online, when there's a bid, we're going to prioritize that bid or that contract going to Canadian companies first. And then when it comes to content, we build important infrastructure. We need to use Canadian steel and Canadian aluminum. We produce some of the best steel in the world, some of the best aluminum in the world. Let's require that in the construction of infrastructure. So we're building big projects. When we build roads, bridges, when we build things that we need as a country, let's use Canadian steel and Canadian aluminum. We can incentivize the strengthening of our economy with policies that actually go towards building more jobs in Canada.
Nous allons maintenant à Christian Noël avec Radio-Canada. C'est à vous.
Bonjour, Monsieur.
Good. Mr. Singh, a lot of the discussion about avoiding tariffs has been about fentanyl over the last couple of days. We've got Pierre Poilievre talking about fentanyl kingpins, and Liberals are appointing a fentanyl czar. In your view, is this Trump threat really about fentanyl?
While fentanyl is serious business, it is deeply hurting our country. It is hurting people around the world. It is tragic. It is heartbreaking. And the pain and suffering caused is unimaginable. What Trump, though, is really about, and it is very clear, he is about making Canada the 51st state. That is what he is about. He has made that very clear. We don't need to guess about what his intentions are. He has repeated it. He wants to use economic pressure on Canada to put us in a weak position. He has been very clear. That is what he wants to do. So we need to fight back on what he wants to do. We need to reject that. And what does it mean when he wants to make us the 51st state? Well, he wants to privatize our healthcare system, creating billions of dollars for his billionaire buddies. We think that is wrong. That is wrong. We are proud of our healthcare system. Of course, we need to improve it. But in Canada, no matter who you are, no matter how much you earn, you can go into a hospital and get the best quality care. That is something that Canadians are proud of. We need to strengthen that. We got people like Pierre Poilievre, who not too long ago, within the past month or so, had a fundraiser at a home, I think it was here in Quebec, in fact, with the owner of that home is someone who owns for-profit hospitals in the United States. And that person raised a lot of money for Pierre Poilievre. What did Pierre Poilievre promise that guy? What did he promise him to get that money, to get that fundraising? I would assume if he's meeting with someone who owns for-profit hotel or for-profit hospitals in the United States, that they were talking about for-profit healthcare in Canada. So Pierre Poilievre is prepared to sell out our healthcare system like Donald Trump wants to do. He wants to make what we have in Canada American, so privatize our healthcare. We want to defend it. It is a Canadian value. We believe in universal healthcare. We believe everyone should get the best care possible. We need to defend it. We need to invest in it. We need more frontline healthcare workers. We need more doctors and nurses and other healthcare workers. That's what we would do. That's what I would do as Prime Minister, defend what we have and fight back against Donald Trump. What Pierre Poilievre wants to do is speed up the privatization and the Americanization of our healthcare system, and that is wrong.
Just as a follow-up, you mentioned earlier that Mark Carney would cut public service. Where are you getting that from? What informed that statement that you said? I don't see that anymore.
His own words. He recently made that announcement that he would cut public sector jobs. And I was surprised, as you kind of sound surprised as well. I expect that of Pierre Poilievre, who also wants to cut frontline workers. He's come out and said that. But I'm surprised that a candidate for the Liberal leadership would also talk about cutting jobs at a time when workers are worried about losing jobs. How does that make sense that you would cut jobs when workers are already facing serious job losses and we are looking at a recession? And that shows you Mark Carney's perspective of the world. If you're a billionaire, if you're a CEO, if you're a large corporation, I'm sure he'll be good for you. But if you're a working class person, if you are a worker in Canada, Mark Carney has shown you who he is about. He's about the billionaires. He's about the CEOs. He's about the big banks. He is not in it for you. New Democrats have one priority. That is you and your family. We are working for working people, and we are proud of that. Every decision we make will be about putting workers first. You can't say the same about Pierre Poilievre, and you certainly now can't say the same about Mark Carney.
Thank you very much. That's all the time we have for today. This concludes our press conference. Ceci est le temps que nous avons pour aujourd'hui. Ça conclut notre conférence de presse. Merci. Bonne journée.